Okay, so have a slightly different schedule this morning, just slightly different. But we will have Vajradevi speaking to us at the end of the morning, so that would be really, really helpful. If I know that sometimes people have to go off for that last half hour. I think there's a few people. If it's possible to stay, then that would be great. So what I would like to do this morning is lead through the whole practice without too many words. But what we've been doing is, if you like, building up the different sort of elements of the practice by drawing our attention to different aspects. You know, the quality of awareness in the first days, these qualities that are helpful to be in the mind, the right view, the crucial perspective, Dharma perspective that we have on our experience, or we're training in reminding ourselves. And then the whole sort of realm of thinking and mental activity in the mind, as well as the background mood and emotions. And there is more. I tell you, there is more, as I'm sure you've noticed. You know, there's all the experience which we have looked at through the different physical senses, the noticing of sounds and sights and all the others. But there's also the really subtle mental process, the subtle perceptions, volitions. Yeah, there's much more that can be said in that realm, the realm of the skandhas, you know, pointing to noticing skandhas in our direct experience. And I'm not going to try and do that this morning, but they just say it because they're you know, if you think of yourself lying on your back looking at that night sky, these different sort of constellations, these different stars, and if you like, we're just getting to know the landscape, the inner landscape, from a certain perspective, from a perspective of that inward looking, that inward resting, so that our eyes, if you like, gradually become accustomed to yeah, maybe what's been in darkness, or what's been known but on a more yeah, conceptual level, the direct experience of seeing those different sort of aspects of mind as they operate, so in their natural state. So yeah, a couple of people have talked to me about the complexity of the practice, or I don't think anyone said this week, but how the mind can feel busy. And I think the more that you're able to settle back, and if you like, let experience come to you, have a sense of receiving what's happening, and greatly lessening that sense of going out, then it won't feel so busy, and it won't feel so complex. I think sometimes it's when we're getting to know a new way of doing something that it can feel like a lot. And I've used quite a lot of words, so in a way that's not surprising. But actually it's very simple. In essence, it's extremely simple. You have awareness, you have that knowing quality of mind, and you have the objects, or what is known. Got a couple of readings around this that I may well read later, but that if you think of this sort of dynamic of of the knowing quality, which is the awareness, knowing and that which is known. And awareness can know anything. So there's all the known things, all those things that can be known in experience. And that's not saying that they all have to be known, that's impossible. But whatever awareness notices, that knowing, when that knowing is operating, anything can be known, even awareness itself. So I wanted to just stress, because we have covered a number of different categories of experience, I wanted to bring the attention back a bit to the right view wisdom aspect. That actually is more important, more significant than the awareness aspect. And sometimes some teachers, I'm thinking particularly of Sayadaw U Tejaniya and Lama Tillman, some of you will be familiar with, they both stress that the right view perspective is the crucial one. That's what comes first. And what Lama Tillman says, he says that in their tradition, which is the Kagyu tradition, Tibetan Buddhism, they don't let people meditate for a long time or intensively. And this is a tradition where people do 3-year retreats on their own, sitting up in a little box. So when he's talking about a long time, that's the perspective, and intensively. They don't let people meditate for a long time or intensively without input or feedback to point them, to reorient them to right view. Otherwise, the tendency is for people to reinforce wrong view, to meditate from the perspective of our normal conditioned perspectives, and the same old views then get reinforced. And often, we get a bit lost and confused. So the importance of right view, in the sense of pointing us in the direction of enlightenment, not the direction of more delusion, or the direction of more comfort and ease and craving in the mind. So I think there are also good reasons to choose to put awareness first, at least in timing, just to help establish that basis. Otherwise, I think a basis of being present and awake, so that then right view hopefully makes a bit more sense. That Dharma perspective, because there's a sense of recognizing already in your experience what's happening. So then using that perspective of recognizing something as simply an object arising in experience is a bit less of a leap. So delusion is very strong in the mind, wrong view, delusion. It's where we're coming from. It's sort of what we're born into, isn't it? It's our amniotic fluid, our wallpaper. However we describe it, we're sort of surrounded by delusion, and the journey of the spiritual life is an awakening gradual or at times sudden into wisdom. Free, the mind being freed from delusion. So I thought maybe I'd look at a couple, depending on how much time I've got, look at a couple of different aspects around the wisdom process again. And one of the things that I think is really helpful is to get a sense of this quality of moha. Moha is the Pali word for delusion or ignorance. So it's the third of the three poisons when we talked about greed and aversion, or greed and hatred yesterday, craving and aversion. So moha, delusion, is what sort of underpins the other two. And if craving or aversion are in the mind, then delusion is automatically there. It's like they're resting on this sort of basic dualistic delusive split in the mind. So when I've been talking about habits and patterns and drives and all the sort of conditioned behavior, conditioned thinking, it's all comes under the frame of moha, of delusion. And most of our frames of reference, at least until we come across the Dharma, are to a greater or lesser extent delusive. That doesn't mean that they're, overtly unskillful, or we don't have really sort of creative aspects to our being. But generally, even the best of us is still operating on a sort of a faulty view, a faulty way of seeing, and that's to do with this perspective of fixity, of inherent selfhood, and the delusions of permanence. So in recognizing moha, in recognizing delusion, it helps us. It's like it comes into awareness. It comes into something that we can notice, rather than something that we're completely immersed in. So one of the ways that delusion is limited is that it generally pays attention to concepts, to ideas about experience, rather than the direct experience, rather than the direct sort of nature of something. And because concepts are our ideas and our views about what's happening, that, as I've talked about before, they're always a shorthand. They're always a drawing back on the memory banks of what was previously the case. So that sort of rough guess or best guess at what's happening. And this means that concepts mean that we can make incredible shortcuts in our thinking, which we have to do. We have to do in order to function. But if that's the only reality we have, or the main reality we have, then we miss out on a lot of clues about what's the actual reality, what's the actual experience. And so that's why on retreat we look to redress that balance and attend much more to what we can directly know in our experience. So we bring it in, we bring in from if you like, the end. There's an end of the story, and that's often where we reside. We put most of our attention on the objects the senses, the sense objects. So think the things that we see, the things that we hear, the blackbird singing, or the bowlers with their machinery, or the chainsaw artist over the road. We conceptualize around the experience of sound, the experience of sound and hearing, or sight and seeing. So in the practice, rather than we automatically know the end of that process, but we're looking to come a bit closer to home, to the seeing, the hearing, the touching, the tasting, the what's happening in the mind. And in that way, we can perceive our experience more accurately. We don't have to guess that actually is the chainsaw artist rather than someone mowing their lawn. There's simply sound that's occurring. So the examples I've described are pretty innocent ones, really. It doesn't really matter if it's the chainsaw artist or someone mowing their lawn. But when we do the same thing by misperceiving how someone is looking at us, depending on our temperament, that could be just that we get upset and think that they're angry with us, where in fact they're completely vacant and not thinking about us at all. Depending on our temperament, that could make us in turn very angry. And a lot of conflict, so much conflict in the world comes from misperceiving a situation. We misperceive, we misinterpret motives, actions. And it's much more based on our own conditioned, the experiences that have conditioned us. That's what we're likely to respond on the basis of the sum of those conditioned experiences. So the more we can get to the direct experience, then the less. In a way, it gives us a way of looking a bit more at our conditioned reactions and being able to question them, to not take them as true, not take them as read. So I think sometimes the actual experience can seem a bit dull compared to the drama, if you like, of the things that we see, that we hear, that we enjoy, that we like. Especially if we can try and orient ourselves towards the pleasant side of the equation rather than the unpleasant. But once we get a taste, I think, for the immediacy and simplicity of our direct experience, it can become something that's more subtle and more subtly satisfying to stay with. So we get a taste for what our actual experience is like. And we can see the stories, the dramas, the ideas that are going on that are created from that simple sense experience. And without going into them, the awareness of that process is what becomes more satisfying and insightful. So we start to distinguish quite clearly between that concept nature and that reality nature. And it's important that we understand both. We're not looking to just sort of switch into a completely different mode, partly because we need the conceptual mode, as I said, to function. but we need to understand how it works, how this process of constructing goes on, how it is that misinterpreting happens, how it is that we get the wrong end of the stick, really seeing that in experience. So just a little about how moha, how you might notice it in the mind. What does delusion feel like in the mind? It might seem a bit of an impossible question. So I had a long retreat in Burma where it seemed like most of my experience was of noticing delusion in the mind. This came after the previous retreat, which was very much about craving in the mind. So I think I was just working through them. I think aversion was popping up throughout, as it will, but definitely felt like on this particular retreat, I was getting a sense of moha. So earlier in the week, I mentioned can't be bothered mind. So that could be a little bit of aversion in there, but it's also that's the sort of apathy or resignation or dullness. Sort of don't know mind in quite a stagnant sense. That moha is sort of awash in, really. Those moments. Confusion and doubt. I think doubt is part of delusion. And I think we can really see the delusive nature of doubt. If you can, those moments when you've recognized doubt, perhaps you can look back and see how well delusion spun its web of story, how believable it was, and how for some time we were completely sucked in with believing the doubt. Often it's self-doubt as well. Often it's something insidious or undermining that keeps us in the status quo. I think one of the characteristics of moha is it's quite happy to be in the status quo. What I noticed, one of the things I noticed on this particular retreat in Burma was the time wasting quality of moha. It was quite happy to spend whole meditations not really doing anything, not quite getting down to, I can see some nods, that's reassuring. Not quite getting down to it. Oh, and Anshi, no. Okay. So moha can actually find that quite enjoyable. Just sort of a bit of sort of musing, a bit of wandering, a bit of confusion, but not quite having a strong enough tension simply to be present. Be present. So I noticed all this. I noticed quite a lot of being lost in this type of activity, but there was also enough awareness to be quite interested in it and observe it for its own sake. Observe it to get to know these qualities of mind. Because I think quite often aversion can kick in and say, I don't want to be like this. I don't want to, so I better get down to it. I better do something. That doing sometimes is driven by just finding the experience unpleasant, or in a way reacting to the fact that you are wasting time. Delusion is wasting time. But it's slightly different to just be interested in the mind doing that. Not why is the mind doing that. I think it's a given. You know, delusion is part of our makeup until there's some wisdom in the mind. So we don't need to ask why. I think that was one of the questions that the Buddha refused to answer, not specifically about delusion, but there are certain questions like that. Not so much, but just being curious about the fact that it is happening. Perhaps seeing, if there's any value in the why, it's seeing the conditions perhaps that lead to more or less delusion in the mind. But that comes from observation rather than asking the question. So I think there's that type of delusive mind quality. It's more hazy, it's a bit more confused, it's a bit more the flavor of stagnation, wool gathering maybe. But there's another type of moha, and there may well be others, but these are the particular two that I noticed. So the other one I noticed was to do with wrong views, and it was to do with being quite certain about things, what I'd call false certainty. And often the false certainty thinks in opposites or dichotomies, and thinks in absolutes. She's like this. She's always like this. He never does the washing up. Never says anything nice about me. You know, whatever it is, we're not open to different possibilities. We've sort of come down on. We fixed something. We fixed it in, and that's one of the very strong qualities of moha. So false certainty is also where we think we're right. Maybe sometimes we think somebody else is right, but there's a certain sort of strength of feeling around it. So we're less open to exploration, less open to that this isn't necessarily the end of the story, that it's the point in time when certain conditions have come together, but an openness to something evolving, something moving in another direction or a different direction. And obviously that's really helpful to have that perspective with ourselves as well as with other people. So I might feel really rotten, and if I can have the perspective, this is a point in time. This is not. I'm not going to fix this as me, or this is this really difficult part of me. Somehow in fixing it, there's the implicit idea that it's always going to be there or it's going to come back. Just be, having a sense of the story continuing and unfolding. Sayadaw U Tejaniya talks, has this little phrase, he says, assumption, presumption and speculation are always the work of moha. And I don't think this needs much unfolding really. I think we can get ourselves into a lot of trouble by assuming that we know. And assuming again it's an aspect of working with those shortcuts, those concepts. We've got an idea which may or may not bear any relationship to what's actually happening. We assume that somebody else, we assume that we know what they feel or what they want. But it's an assumption until we ask. until we have some sort of dialogue with them. So I'll just say it again. Assumption, presumption, and speculation are always the work of moha, of delusion. So little quote from Daniel Kahneman. I think he's a psychologist who wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. So he's looking more at it from the perspective of the brain, how the brain works. And he says, people are brilliant at creating a narrative from minimal evidence. So this is research showing that people are brilliant at creating a narrative from minimal evidence. So you could see, being with the actual experience, it's going directly against that. We're looking at the evidence, if you like. We're looking at the happenings themselves. And he goes on to say, he says, the brain equals a machine for jumping to conclusions. Like this. So I think it can be very helpful to bear in mind that tendency that's usually where it's operating without us being so aware of it. Not quite aware that I've made a giant leap in my mind to a particular conclusion, but from minimal evidence. So that's a tendency of the delusive mind, and the mind that relates to concepts rather than the actual experience. So when we make these leaps from minimal evidence, we get some sort of picture. We do. I've been talking about a jigsaw, putting in different puzzles. But the trouble is, our jigsaw is when we've done that, it is just not an accurate one. We've made it up, like we painted our own jigsaw. But what we're trying to do by attending to our being curious about our own happenings and arisings, is that we do start to build up, or a picture starts to be built up. We start to see the links, if you like, between, well, we start to see conditionality in action. You recognize the conditions that lead to a certain a result. And when you see that, you see the result. If the result is one of suffering, then if you've seen it clearly, you're less likely to do it again. And if it leads to a bit more freedom, then it's a bit like there's been awareness through that process of seeing how, or feeling how, that can happen. I'm not going to now, but I did want to talk a bit about the refrain section of the Satipatthana Sutta, because it's very, I'll just say it's there's a lot of the wisdom perspective in there, and overall the refrain is looking at the general characteristics of experience. It's looking at the processes involved rather than going into the content, going into what I was calling the end result, the story in the mind rather than the thinking process. The particular, identifying the particular sounds or sights rather than the fact that seeing or hearing is happening. So maybe the last thing to say is, how to say it? Yeah, it's a type of insight. It's a level of insight to be able to distinguish in the moment between the object at the end of the process and the awareness, the mind that's aware of it. Another way of putting that is the knowing and the known. If we're clear in the moment, that's what's happening. There's the knowing, the awareness is knowing, and we can feel that knowing. And then there's what's known. That can be the whole practice in itself, just recognizing, in a way, those two things that will generally arise together, if you like, consciousness and its object, awareness and its object. They'll arise together, but they can both be known. So rather than just knowing the object end of it, looking to know the awareness and, as much as possible, rest with that, rest in that, that knowing. So the rest of the refrain we'll have to wait for another time. Let's have a leg stretch, and then I'll lead us through a sit in a couple of minutes. So I will lightly lead. I promise this time I will lightly lead, just to sort of point out in a way that those different sort of constellations in that sky. But I have a couple of readings, one from Bhante and one from Utejaniya, that I'll start with, because I think they're talking directly about this idea of the knowing and the known. And I think the first one, Bhante's perspective, is talking about our conditioned way of looking at things. So he's using the language of the knower and what's known, and that's what we're usually doing, knower and known. And then Utejaniya goes on to talk about the right view perspective, so the knowing and known. And I just think they're a really fantastic pair of readings to go together. So the risk of bombarding you with too many words, I will read them. So the Bhante one is from Living with Awareness. To know something, indeed to know anything, seems naturally to call for a knower, as well as something that is known. But the Buddhist position runs counter to this intuitive knowledge. It asks us to note what we observe in our actual experience from moment to moment, and then to ask ourselves whether we can really deduce from the stream of sense impressions alone the presence of a permanent self that has all these experiences. Obviously, this is a question to which a negative answer is expected. According to Buddhist philosophy, all we can say with certainty is that consciousness arises. The unchanging self or soul that is supposedly the source of that consciousness is something we have added on, an illusion produced by the very activity of dualistic thinking. It is our belief in its existence that ultimately holds us back from insight into the nature of things as they really are. And if we can convince ourselves through our own observation that this self is an illusion, the fetter will be broken. Sayadaw U Tejaniya. In Vipassana, you must remember that there are always the knowing and the known minds. So the known minds, the rest of the mind, don't have to be calm. They don't have to be peaceful. They could be angry, raging, all that going on. All that needs to be steady is the knowing. That's the only steadiness that you need, the steadiness of the watching, aware mind. The rest of the minds can do what they want. Checking in with where you are right now. And just see where that question takes you. See where awareness lands once you're present. Settling back and receiving the various impressions through the physical senses and through the mind sense. If your eyes are open, you might find that all of a sudden there's a switch from the mind that's seeing but not really seeing, to awareness being present and the seeing taking a different quality. You know that you're seeing. And you might be able to contact the same thing with the sense of touch. Hearing. And the different mind processes. It's a function of delusion to be there, but not really there. So really appreciating those moments when you wake up and you're really there, present. And you might see that process or feel that process happen many times in a single sit. Not really there, really there. Present and awake. So we're not imposing the concept that we have to be present all the time. But by allowing the mindfulness, the awareness to come and go, and following that process of freely moving in and out of awareness. We allow the awareness to be present more moments. And notice how the awareness moves from one object to another, one process to another. Recognizing clearly, but very delicately, what is arising with it, co-arising of awareness and thinking, awareness and feeling. Awareness and hearing. And sometimes an object in experience will call for more of our attention. And if that's the case, then resting with that, perhaps it's a strong emotion or some physical discomfort. And keep knowing sadness, for example, is here. What's that like? What's the actual experience? Feeling, sensation, any degree of craving or aversion. Checking to see if the right view perspective is there. Sadness or pain or joy are simply objects arising in experience, staying as long as the conditions support them being there, changing, disappearing when the fuel runs out and the conditions change. And as best we can, allowing that process to happen without our personal involvement or interference. Whatever it is, boredom, discouragement, excitement, there's nothing outside the scope of knowing, of awareness. Often it's simply recognizing that knowing is happening. So let's have a few minutes where, if yeah, the usual request, if there was something that perhaps caught your interest, you felt quite present, and perhaps also where you felt some degree of right view was there. And that may be from the practice we've just done, but it may also have been something that you've noticed outside of formal practice, perhaps just a moment of presence, the mind being awake and aware in the middle of something up, washing up, or something else. Okay, Maitrimati.
Yeah, so Linda, first of all.
Linda, where are you? I think you'll come to the front page when you speak. Yeah.
We should be able to read themselves.
Hello, Vajradevi. What I'd like to talk about is sleepiness, and I slept well last night, and but every now and then it can be at a certain time, perhaps 5 o'clock, or it could, but it's like midday, and I've got this heavy sleepiness, and I thought, no, I'm going to really just sit with sleepiness, and I thought I'm just going to keep looking at it, and I kept looking at it, and it felt foggy, then it felt thick and dense, and I thought, and then I would close my eyes a little, and then I'd drop, and I thought, no, I'm going to just keep being aware of the sleepiness, and I just stayed with it, and it was really, really powerful, and I thought, it's not because I'm tired, and I thought I could just keep probing it, and I thought, this is habitual. This is habitual, and my mind's a little bit bored as well, because it's got nothing really to think about. I'm just being aware, and my mind wanted to shut down. It wanted something more interesting. So I was just seeing more layers to this sleepiness. It's not that I'm tired. I've often said, oh, I'm tired. And I think that's, what were you saying earlier? This habitual way of, this thought comes up, I can't be bothered. It's, oh, I'm tired. Well, I know I'm not tired. There is tiredness, but it's not like that crushing tiredness that I was feeling in the sit. It just seemed a lot more stronger than that. Just something that's, my mind is fighting something, it's resisting something, and I was just thought, I wasn't good. I just kept staying with it and kept my eyes open and feeling this tiredness wanting to crush me to go to sleep.
Great.
Yeah.
Good.
Heavy stuff.
Yeah, good observation. And then as you are able to stay with it, you keep seeing more, like more facets of it. You were talking about layers, but yeah, you could also say just facets of the experience. If you like, I never quite have a good analogy for this, but it's a bit like things keep if we're able to observe in helpful way, not staring something down, but more things will sort of appear. There's almost like they'll come from the observing mind, and they'll come into view. They'll somehow come into view, things that haven't been there before, but they have been present. They have been affecting how the mind is seeing. They've been affecting the lens, the viewing lens. So the difference between viewing from the lens that has boredom within it is really, really different, as you notice, to observing when boredom is itself the object of experience. Yeah, can completely change the experience. Thank you. I think they'll move on to someone else just because we haven't got much time. Yeah.
Okay, Summer next.
Yeah, I think what I've just been experiencing, I can really relate to what Linda was saying about the sort of that aspect of tiredness, boredom, apathy, whatever it was. I know that's been happening for me for the last day or so. I've been going in and out of that. And today I was feeling just so much more aware of it. And I'm sitting here in my yurt. I'm really fortunate that I have this lovely meadow to be looking out on. And as you were talking us through the meditation, it was really helping me to focus on this place of awareness of this moment in time, watching these tall grasses waving. And then towards the end of the meditation, I really felt something very strongly about memories that have been coming up, and this sense of realization about the amount of times that I've been called, that there, that I have, and I feel really emotional about it, but in a very good way, in many ways. Just a sort of sense of what my purpose is, and how to arrive in that place, and how to stay when it, when there's part of me just wants to run because it's uncomfortable. And I feel like there's something in that presence of awareness that's now beginning to stay much more strongly, and I am able to watch that, be aware of it, witness it, and vocalize it, which is a really strong thing, because what's been happening in the past is I've just got overwhelmed and I've not been able to share it. Yeah, so I think that's probably as much as I can say right now. But yeah,
that's great. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Yeah, lovely.
Okay, Anne Evans.
Hello. I haven't shared anything up till now. I normally like to take a couple points down, but I had a very strong reaction today. I've been floundering for a couple of days. I would think I was getting something, and then I would sort of lose it. Today was more like an aha moment about delusion and how very deluded I am, and how that's the basis of so much. I can remember how I used to say, well, I know that I'm greedy and a hater, but at least I'm not deluded, which is so silly, because I could see that that's just that's just like the first step or something. But I really got that so much. And I also, as we were meditating, I felt quite peaceful. I realized my aha moment is just, this is all a part of the process too. It's not any kind of, it's just another step on the way, not more than that. But I feel very good today. I feel like I'm getting it more, and that's what I wanted to. It's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for sharing. Yeah, the mind is very slippery, and I think when it's also it's very subtle, and so being able to observe, being able to be aware of those sorts of subtleties without it sort of continually, it continually slips off. I know for myself that things that I've understood one day or remembered one, so it's so I think that process of remembering, re-remembering, is just part of what we work with. It's also part of how delusion and wisdom function as well. So yeah, thank you for sharing. I'm happy to hear. Okay, maybe one more, maybe one or two.
Sarah Wellard.
Hello. I wanted to say something about what I experience when I kind of rest my awareness, or the awareness rests on something, that it just kind of disappears. So like thoughts or sensations, it's like, so I'm wondering if that's a different practice that I'm doing. Because it doesn't seem to be quite what you're kind of pointing towards. The object's not there anymore when the awareness rests on it, and there's just like kind of peacefulness.
Okay. It might be that objects are very momentary. You might, the awareness might be sort of noticing very subtle objects, which can come and go quickly. It's something worth checking. It doesn't sound like it's what's happening, but checking the quality of awareness, just see how much, or the quality of effort and energy, just see how much effort, and see if the mind and body are really settled back, really just this sense of receiving sense impressions, receiving what's happening rather than going out to them. So, as I say, it doesn't sound like that's what's happening, but it's worth checking just to see. Sometimes when we use more energy, then objects can just disappear, particularly thoughts. But other than that, if the mind is quite quiet and there aren't that many things arising, they're disappearing, rest with the awareness, recognize the awareness, recognize that the mind is knowing, that process is happening, and what that is like, what that feels like.
Thank you.
Okay. Maybe one more?
Yeah, so Rakesh Rose.
Hello. Can you see
Hello.
me?
Yes.
Well, I think I've come full circle. You know, that what you said to me, that said to us the first day, is about this energy. You know, how much energy is being taken up. I kind of like took that on, and when I sat, I could have just sat the rest of the day, you know, because there was no energy being expended. And then through the week, there's been some days that have been only difficult in that I was trying too hard to what you've been talking about, trying to look for things. Is this happening? I mean, it's been useful because, you know, I've learned a lot, labeling thoughts and so on. And it seems like I've come full circle today, and it happened again. You know, I think you must have said something about maybe keeping your eyes open or something. And I've never been able to meditate with my eyes open, but I did. And you're right, you know, then you're not seeing anything anymore. There's just that blurriness around the seeing, which makes it, I don't know, it takes, for me, it seemed to take the distraction away from the thinking, because, you know, I was focusing on the seeing. And then it was, again, you know, and to a certain extent, you know, I've seen images of the Buddha where his eyes are just slightly open, you know, they're not closed. And it seemed to be, you know, doing that, it made it very easy. And then it's just, well, yeah, actually, I could sit here all the time, you know. And that's something I've never found in meditation. You know, it's always been a strive. You know, it's always been a strive. I've got to try, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. But I think if I take one thing away, it's going to be that, you know, not to put a great deal of energy into it. Thank you so much.
Great. That's that what you've described in terms of you could sit there all day. I mean, you understand this anyway, but it's a really good indication of the quality of energy and effort. So obviously you can feel the difference in that, which is where it counts. But I think it's Utejaniya who says something like, practice. If we're able to practice with that right degree of energy, then practice is not tiring. By the end of the day, with more moments of continuity of awareness, we can have more energy, feel more energy at the end of the day than we started off with.
And it's not just on the cushions. I think off the cushions as well. If you can sort of just be aware, hang on, how much energy is this taking? Can
Absolutely.
I ease into it a bit more? It becomes pleasurable. Cooking becomes pleasurable, you know, everything becomes so pleasurable. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Yes, I'm glad that you brought that out. Yeah, because it's not just going to be a habit of using more energy than's necessary. If we're doing it in sitting, we're going to be doing it in other places as well. So just bringing that awareness to different activities, which hopefully you've been able to do during the week. You can start to see those sorts of patterns, and again, sort of settle back while cooking, settle back while showering or whatever it is. At the computer, especially important, I think, those places where we get sucked in, and technology can be a good one for that. Okay, great, thank you very much. And I think there was a sign, sorry, I'm getting distracted. There was no, I cannot remember what I was about to say. Never mind. No, I know what it was. It was someone saying how moving it was, people sharing their experiences, and just to echo that. I think it is very moving, and it's just valuable. It's just valuable to be able to articulate what's happening more in that other mode of being. We're using language, using concepts because we have to, but trying to articulate something that's of the nature of direct awareness, direct experience. Okay, so let's have a wee break and come back at 20 past, to start at 20 past. And yeah, and then Vajradevi will say a few things, and then I'll give you your last task for the week, and it's a fun one. Okay.
Okay, hello everyone. So I suddenly got spotlighted and got reflected back to myself big time. It's a bit weird. So it's Vajradevi here at Taraloka in the community shrine room, and just wanted to just say a few words to you as we're coming to the end of the retreat. So this is the first kind of big online retreat we've done. So one thing I wanted to mention is that we'd like a bit of feedback from you, because we're going to be doing more, and I'm sure you can help make it better next time round. So I put a little survey up on the Padlet retreat notice board that we're using, which the link's just gone up there on the chat. So it would be great if you could just spend, it'll only take you a few minutes just to fill that in. That would be really helpful. The second thing I wanted to say is tonight, do try and come if you can. There'll be a chance for thank yous. Hopefully we'll show a little clip of the Earth Sky Garden. And also there's a special Satipatthana puja. Never been done before. So do come to that. And then the third thing I just wanted to say is about dana, it's about money. So actually the first, I will start crying when I talk about this. The first thing I wanted to say was thank you. Thank you very much to all of you just for coming. You know, it just makes this event feel really, really valuable. And also so many of you, you know, your faces I see have given so much to Taraloka already. You know, you've given years of your lives, some of you, and you've given lots of money. You've given your participation retreats, some of you volunteer. So yeah, I really appreciate that. A big thank you to all of you. And I also want to give a really big thank you to Vajradevi, particularly around finance, because we she's just said she's happy for the dana to go to Tara Loka. So we are supporting her. Well, you know, feels a bit token, but giving her some money to get away, hopefully to the Orkneys, if possible, for a solitary bit later in the summer. But she said she's happy for the, any money from this retreat to come to Tara Loka. So as you'll realise, since the end of March, our income just bombed. So this is how we're making any money at the moment. So it really, it's in, you know, we probably have between £6,000 and £7,000 of outgoings a month. So we're needing to cover that. So any money you can give is completely fantastic. It is dana, so if you haven't got any money, that's fine. And if you have, you can give us lots. That would also be fine. Yeah, there's all sorts of ways you can give. If you go onto Padlet, there's lots of links there, and we've got donate links just about everywhere you can think of on our YouTube channel. You probably noticed. I hope they're not driving you nuts. We just wanted to make it easy. You can also give through the website as well. So it would be really helpful. I mean, partly just to keep Tara Loka going, but I'm aware it's like this is going to be a bit of a long haul, you know, the whole COVID-19 thing and the recession. And we just want to give whatever we can to all women, regardless of what financial situation they're in. And, you know, I know lots of people are going to be struggling quite a lot financially over the next few years, probably. Yeah, so I'd really appreciate that. That would be fantastic. I think that's all I probably need to say, actually. Yeah. So I'll hand back over to Vajradevi.
Great, lovely. Thank you very much, Vajradevi. One of the things I've long admired about Tara Loka was, in a way, the trust in how valuable Tara Loka is to women, and how trust in all of us that in our response of wanting to give to Tara Loka, and over the years how that's paid off. You know, that degree of trust, that degree of open-handedness from your side, from Tara Loka's side too, and has been met. It just feels like it's really been met with our own open-handedness. So the last thing this morning is just to say a little bit about it's what Utejaniya calls talking meditation, which I really like. I often quite want to do it on retreat, but usually the retreats are silent, and there's a little bit of it often doesn't feel quite right to do it, so I usually just mention it. But I think, well, we're not going to do it because Zoom actually probably makes it slightly awkward to do. So talking meditation, we're very used to talking, we're very used to having an ethical framework for what we say, both within the 5 precepts and the 10 precepts. So we're used to considering what we say in the light of ethics, and that includes, you know, how we say things, you know, whether they're helpful, whether they're truthful. There's all sorts of ways that we already do that. So this is, if you like, adding a dimension of taking awareness through just knowing while we're talking that we're talking, or knowing talking and listening, talking. So it allows for more continuity of awareness through times when we're engaged with other people, when we're engaged in conversation. So the talking itself, talking and listening, become objects of awareness. they become something that can help grow and strengthen awareness. So I just invite you to experiment around that. I can say that it can be easier depending on what you're talking about. If you're talking about the Dharma, or if you're talking about awareness, makes it so much easier because you've just got the triggers all the time embedded within the content of your speech. If you're talking with a lot of people, which probably isn't the case for many of us these days, that it just, you've got a lot more complexity involved. But if you're talking with one other person, and perhaps particularly if that person, you know, you can do it together, you can practice talking meditation together, then it's yeah, it's very helpful. Because talking's often where we lose a lot of awareness. We reach out towards the other part. We go out of ourselves. We don't sort of settle back very often, particularly if we get engaged and excited. So that's not to say we don't get engaged, but perhaps we do it from a place we've just got more of that sense of resting at home, if you like, while we're talking. Yeah, I often tell this little story, but I'm going to tell it again. So some friends of mine taught themselves to maintain awareness through talking and listening. There was two brothers who were very good friends with each other, and they read War and Peace aloud to each other, which obviously took quite a long time. But by the end of that process of the awareness while speaking, awareness while listening, they both felt that actually they were able to maintain it while talking, which is quite something, really. So hopefully you can give that a go. If you're living on your own, then yeah, there's obviously, it may not happen today. It might be that you're not having other sort of online communication with people today, or some sort of work communication, but maybe just keep it in the back of your mind as it's another sphere where we often lose awareness, but we don't have to. Okay, all right, so groups again at a little bit of an earlier time. So if you can be there, well, 4:05 to start at 4:15 until 5. And I think Maitri Mati said the other day that if your group ends up being quite small, you may not want to meet for all that time, but if you could start at the earlier time, and then you can always just decide to finish your group a bit earlier if you've not got much else to say, and just log on a bit later, or stay tuned into Zoom until 5. And in terms of what you talk about, well, you could practice talking meditation, couldn't you? You could do that, and you could report back to each other on how that is. Do it live, as it were. How is it? How aware do I feel in just talking for a couple of minutes about my experience, my current experience, or how it's been during the week. So yeah, I'll leave it there. I'm sure you'll find plenty to talk about. So see you later.